Max Verstappen uncovered something in the simulator that Red Bull had hidden even from Ferrari's radar. Laurent Mekies himself could not believe what leaked out of Milton Keynes. A single technical revelation could erase years of nightmares in Singapore. What Verstappen has found might change the entire World Championship. Max Verstappen's simulator revelations have transformed the narrative of this championship. What began as a dominant but expected victory in Baku was in fact the visible tip of an iceberg, the first signal that Red Bull had found something deeper within the DNA of the RB21. Beneath that surface triumph lay weeks of obsessive simulator work, where Verstappen unlocked configurations never before tested on high-downforce street circuits. These discoveries are not marginal gains, they are structural solutions to problems that had defined Red Bull's limitations for years. Laurent Mekies, and with him the Ferrari camp, received the first leaked data with disbelief. For rivals, Singapore was supposed to be the point of weakness, the fortress where Red Bull could be punished. Instead, the numbers suggested the opposite: stability in the slowest corners, traction in the most irregular sectors, and a car that no longer overheated under tropical humidity. The balance of power, once predictable, now feels unstable, tilting in Red Bull's favor at the worst possible moment for their adversaries. The history makes this even more dramatic. Verstappen, with more than 60 career victories, has never conquered Marina Bay. 8 attempts, no wins. The ghosts of 2023, when he qualified 11th and finished 5th, still haunt fans and rivals alike. But the simulator breakthroughs promise a reversal of fortune so extraordinary that it could erase nearly a decade of frustration. If those discoveries hold, Verstappen's kryptonite may become the very place that reignites his championship battle. Red Bull's engineers are already speaking with cautious optimism, Pierre Watt reminding everyone that Singapore will be the real test, Helmut Marko admitting that if they are competitive there, the problem is solved. Verstappen himself radiates an unusual confidence, one that comes not from bravado but from data-backed conviction. When he speaks of Singapore now, it is not as an obstacle but as an opportunity. And for a driver as brutally honest about weaknesses as Verstappen, that change in tone is a revelation in itself. The consequences extend far beyond one weekend. Should Red Bull succeed, the psychological damage to McLaren and Ferrari could be severe. Piastri, leading the championship but still inexperienced in managing this level of pressure, would face the daunting reality that no circuit is safe, no terrain off limits for Verstappen. And for Ferrari, losing their urban stronghold would mean recalibrating strategies for the rest of the season. Singapore, then, is not just another race. It is the pivot point that may decide how the final 7 rounds are fought. Max Verstappen's victory in Baku was not just another routine win to add to his long career tally. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that something had shifted inside Red Bull's garage. He controlled all 51 laps as if he were running on rails, but the real story began after the checkered flag, in the shadows of Milton Keynes. There, Verstappen locked himself in the simulator, not to replay triumph, but to dissect weaknesses. He was already thinking about Singapore, a track that had humiliated him before. For a driver who measures success in world titles rather than podiums, that circuit had become the stubborn reminder that no one is invincible. And it was in this preparation where the first shockwaves reached the paddock. Inside the simulator, Verstappen went far beyond standard preparation. He did not simply test a few aerodynamic balances or rehearse the familiar braking points. He explored a philosophy of car behavior that Red Bull had never been able to master on street circuits. Hours became days, and what emerged from those sessions was not a setup sheet but a blueprint for transformation. Engineers whispered about new equilibrium points, windows of performance that the RB21 had never shown on track. It was no longer about limiting damage in Singapore. It was about rewriting the very rules of engagement at Marina Bay, a battlefield that had punished Red Bull for years. The first data sets filtered quietly across the walls of rival teams. Ferrari, expecting to exploit Red Bull's struggles under heavy downforce, suddenly found themselves confronted with numbers that did not fit the narrative. Stability in slow corners, traction on irregular surfaces, and thermal management in humid conditions, all historically weak points, now looked surprisingly controlled. For Laurent Mekies, who had built part of his Singapore strategy on the assumption that Red Bull would falter, the revelation was nothing short of staggering. It was as if the enemy had found a way to fortify their weakest gate overnight. He did not just see numbers, he saw the collapse of an advantage Ferrari had guarded for years. What makes this situation electrifying is Verstappen's obsession with detail. We remember how, back in 2021, he convinced someone to model Jeddah before the track even existed in Formula One software. That same mentality has now been applied with surgical precision to Singapore. Verstappen recreated nighttime conditions, humidity variations, and even the way tires lose grip across the changing surfaces of Marina Bay. For every weakness he once suffered, he designed a countermeasure. It is not a coincidence that insiders describe these configurations as revolutionary. They are not tweaks, they are a conceptual reset. And when a driver of Verstappen's caliber finds alignment between vision and machinery, the sport takes notice. From Red Bull's perspective, the timing could not be more critical. The championship deficit to Piastri is still 69 points, and every remaining circuit counts. Singapore has always been the place where Red Bull expected to bleed points. Now, with the simulator discoveries, it could become the weekend that reopens the title fight. Engineers who once spoke with cautious tones now allow themselves a measure of optimism. Helmut Marko warned that Singapore would be the ultimate test. If Verstappen's data proves correct, that test may turn into a declaration of strength. For a team that thrives on momentum, this shift is almost as valuable as raw pace. And so, the stage is set. Verstappen enters Marina Bay with more than hope. He enters with proof that the kryptonite of his career may finally be dissolving. Laurent Mekies and Ferrari are forced to re-evaluate strategies, McLaren must consider the psychological impact on Piastri, and Formula One as a whole braces for a weekend where history might be rewritten. Because if Verstappen's simulator revelations materialize on the streets of Singapore, it will not just be another victory. It will be the demolition of a myth, the closure of a chapter of frustration, and the birth of a new balance of power. This was only the beginning. Baku was not just a victory, it was the foundation stone of a revolution. Verstappen led every single one of the 51 laps with an ease that bordered on cruel efficiency, opening a gap of more than 14 seconds to George Russell and Carlos Sainz. What made the domination so telling is that it came only weeks after Red Bull had looked lost, with the RB21 unable to find balance on circuits requiring downforce. Suddenly, the team that had stumbled was not only competitive, it was untouchable. And this swing of fortune was not by chance, it was the visible surface of weeks of silent work on the simulator, work designed to prepare for a very different enemy, Marina Bay. The new floor introduced in Monza had changed the conversation entirely. At first, it seemed like another routine upgrade, a marginal gain for high-speed venues. But in Baku, the evidence was overwhelming. The car behaved differently, as if its DNA had been rewritten. Verstappen exploited this transformation to the full, pushing without fear of instability, trusting a chassis that previously had betrayed him in similar conditions. By the end of that Sunday, the message to rivals was unmistakable. The RB21 had opened a performance window that had not existed before, wide enough to cover the demands of 2 consecutive weekends. The leap in competitiveness was no longer theoretical, it was quantified on the stopwatch. What truly stunned the technical community was not the floor itself, but how Verstappen integrated it into his simulator program. He refused to treat the part as an isolated piece of carbon fiber. He treated it as the cornerstone of a new architecture. Red Bull engineers began to notice patterns. Ride height settings that once produced instability now generated grip, suspension geometries that had caused tire overheating now prolonged life. This was not about incremental adjustments, it was about unlocking hidden modes of performance. Verstappen's fingerprints were on every parameter, and the simulator log showed an intensity rarely matched by any other driver on the grid. In the simulator, Verstappen sometimes clocked 10 hours without pause, shifting from aerodynamic mapping to tire degradation models and even simulating the impact of track temperature drops between practice and race. These sessions became laboratories where weaknesses were not only diagnosed but solved. For Singapore, the focus was sharper: humid nights, slow traction zones, unpredictable grip. Verstappen rehearsed them like a concert pianist rehearses scales, until every possible failure point became familiar territory. The engineers described his discipline as obsessive, but it is precisely that obsession that built the illusion of invincibility in Baku and now threatens to turn Marina Bay into the same kind of fortress. The key point is simple. What happened in Azerbaijan was not an isolated miracle. It was a preview of what might unfold in Singapore. The RB21, once allergic to high downforce configurations, now appears capable of thriving under them. The simulator data reveals stability in sectors where Red Bull historically lost seconds per lap. For rivals, the warning is chilling. If Verstappen can carry the efficiency of Baku into the technical labyrinth of Marina Bay, then the championship, which seemed locked in Piastri's favor, suddenly reopens. And that is why Laurent Mekies reacted with disbelief. Ferrari's calculations assumed weakness, and weakness may no longer exist. For years, Singapore has been the acid test for Red Bull, the place where their cars looked vulnerable in ways that the stopwatch could not hide. Whenever the RB19, RB20, or RB21 were forced into heavy downforce setups, the price was steep. The car became overweight with drag, unstable in braking zones, and overheated in the relentless humidity of Marina Bay. The pattern was always the same: strong in free practice, fading in qualifying, and struggling for consistency across the long race distance. It was not bad luck, it was a structural weakness embedded in the concept of the car. Rival teams, Ferrari in particular, built strategies around exploiting this Achilles heel, counting on Red Bull to bleed points whenever the calendar reached Singapore. That is why Verstappen's simulator findings are so revolutionary. Instead of merely adjusting wing angles or stiffening suspension, he reimagined how the RB21 could breathe under high downforce. The breakthrough came when he synchronized the new Monza floor with suspension geometries that, until then, had never been considered together. Suddenly, the airflow under the chassis did not collapse when the rear ride height was raised, but stabilized. This meant the car could carry more aerodynamic load without losing efficiency. For the first time, Red Bull engineers saw simulation data where the RB21 gained traction in slow corners without losing its balance in fast changes of direction. It was not compromise, it was harmony. The implications reach far beyond numbers on a graph. By mastering this integration, Red Bull has effectively found a way to neutralize Singapore's most punishing sectors. The chicanes and 90-degree bends, where the RB21 used to skid and slide, now appear manageable, even predictable. Verstappen's hands-on feedback confirmed what the simulator projected: the car was no longer fighting him under maximum load. Instead, it responded with a precision that encouraged aggression. In an environment where hesitation is punished with lost tenths, this shift could be decisive. For the Dutchman, the message is clear: he no longer enters Singapore hoping to survive, he enters believing he can dictate pace. This is precisely why Laurent Mekies was shaken. Ferrari's strength in street circuits has always been tied to their ability to generate downforce without overheating tires. If Red Bull has found a way to replicate that strength, Ferrari's advantage evaporates overnight. The simulator does not lie. Verstappen has opened a window of performance that changes the tactical balance. No longer will Ferrari and McLaren assume that Marina Bay will cut Red Bull down to size. The balance of power is shifting, and it is happening not through chance, but through one driver's relentless search for technical perfection. History is merciless when it comes to Max Verstappen in Singapore. Across 8 appearances, a driver who has conquered almost every other venue in Formula One has never stood on the top step at Marina Bay. 2 second places, 1 third, and a crushing 5th in 2023 remain as scars on a resume that otherwise glitters with dominance. For a man with more than 60 victories, the statistic is not just surprising, it is haunting. Fans and rivals alike whisper the same phrase: Singapore is Verstappen's kryptonite. That single circuit has resisted all his brilliance, all of Red Bull's ingenuity, leaving him exposed where he should have been untouchable. And for years, every September, the same uncomfortable truth returned. Red Bull simply could not tame Marina Bay. The low point arrived in 2023. Verstappen arrived as reigning champion, leading a season of crushing superiority. Yet under the bright lights of Singapore, he qualified only 11th and finished 5th, ending his streak of podiums. That weekend revealed the fragility of Red Bull's concept on street circuits. The car that thrived in Monza or Spa shrank when forced into tight corners and heavy braking. Rivals took confidence from this. Ferrari, McLaren, even Mercedes could approach Singapore knowing that Verstappen was vulnerable there. For them, Marina Bay was more than a race, it was a weapon against Red Bull's supremacy. For Verstappen, it was a reminder that even the most dominant campaigns can fracture in the wrong environment. Now, the simulator suggests a reversal so dramatic it borders on theater. Instead of preparing for damage limitation, Verstappen may enter Singapore with the tools to dominate. The data shows stability where once there was chaos, grip where once there was sliding, and efficiency where once there was overheating. The possibility is staggering. The track that denied him victory for nearly a decade could suddenly become the platform for a statement of power. If that projection becomes reality, the narrative flips overnight. The man haunted by Marina Bay could use it as the springboard for a title comeback. And that is the real twist, turning kryptonite into gold. For Laurent Mekies, this is not just a surprise. It is a nightmare. Because if Verstappen conquers Singapore, Ferrari's advantage dissolves, and the championship fight ignites again.